So the first key consideration when we freeze our coffee is how are we going to freeze it. So in here I have some vac packs and I also have coffee frozen in a tube. Now these vac packs is what we've been doing for the last few years with our frozen coffee. However, one of the disadvantages is the waste in leftover plastic after chopping that open. Now we can reuse those bags a number of times, but there is a point where we do have to try and recycle it, and that becomes an arduous task. So for a long time, we've frozen our coffees in vac packs. Now these vac packs have extended out the shelf life of frozen coffee for more than a year. I've got coffee from 2017 that's still tasting pretty good in this method. So lately, we've been using these centrifuge tubes. Now by putting coffee into this, having minimal headspace in the tube, we've been able to get shelf life for several months while that coffee's still been tasting absolutely amazing. So one of the big advantages we have from using a tube is we can reuse this time and time again and not creating a lot of plastic waste. It's also a lot less time consuming to do our weighing out of our individual doses. So one of the benefits we gain from these tubes is it's a lot faster to simply open it up and do your grinding process. When you have coffees in vac pack, you have to pull out a pair of scissors, you have to snip it, open up the dose and then put it into the grinder. When we're running a lot of shots in the bar, this can make running these frozen menu coffees a little bit more difficult. So lately we've been using test tubes more for freezing. This is something that Matt Lewin did a lot of work on for his competition for WBC. Now freezing this coffee in a tube is able to get slightly rounder acid structure, slightly softer and smoother texture in espresso coffee. And on testing with filter coffees, we've been getting really great results from this as well. Now when freezing in a vac pack, you are concentrating and putting that coffee under pressure. So if that coffee is slightly too fresh, the coffee can taste a bit heavy and a little bit edgy on the palate. So our window of when we need to freeze that coffee for a vac pack is slightly smaller than when we freeze down for a tube. Usually with a vac pack, it's sucking air and some volatiles out of the bag as well. So we do need to vac a coffee down a few days before it's tasting at its absolute best. But for a tube, we're able to freeze that coffee down when it's tasting at its best, and then we're going to guarantee that we're going to get that same experience moving forward as well. If we use a vac pack and we taste that coffee at its absolute best and then vacuum it, we can suck out some of the volatiles and actually lose a little bit of its quality as the coffee sits there in the freezer. So moving forward, we're extremely excited about using these tubes more and more in our coffee bars to preserve that coffee at its best. So you're probably wondering why freeze in tubes rather than freezing straight in the coffee bag. Well, we found that tubes allow us to run around a 20-gram dose and have very minimal headspace in that container. Now the result is going to be a lot more consistency from shot to shot, and also it's not going to allow moisture to come from the outside to the inside of the container. Another advantage is that this is going to be a single dose. So every time I pull a container out of the freezer, there's going to be an element of condensation that can happen on the coffee. So if I freeze a larger amount in a coffee bag, I pull that out of the freezer, I open it up, an amount of condensation is going to get attracted onto those beans, and we're going to get a little bit of moisture forming on the surface. So if we allow that moisture to defrost and then to freeze again, it's going to really affect the quality of our coffee. So a lot of blind tasting of coffee frozen in a bag versus frozen in a tube. We found that coffee in a bag lost a lot of quality. We got dryness, a little bit of dustiness, and in this case, a lot sweeter cup, cleaner and more flavor profile.